My younger brother looked me dead in the eyes, smiled, and lied. He told my parents I had stolen money from the house, $300 that he had taken himself and spent before the week was out. But nobody investigated. Nobody asked questions. Nobody said, "Wait, let's hear both sides." My father just stood up from that table, walked to my room, opened my door, and said, "Get your things and get out of my house." I was 17 years old. It was February, and it was snowing. Before I take you back to the beginning, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. My name is Marcus Reed. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, in a brick house on the corner of Talbot and 34th Street, where everybody knew everybody, and the smell of my mother's cooking on Sunday mornings could pull you out of the deepest sleep you ever had. From the outside, we were a good family. My father, Calvin, worked at the Ford plant for 22 years. My mother, Diane, did bookkeeping for a small accounting firm downtown and sang in the church choir every third Sunday with a voice that made people close their eyes. We went to cookouts in the summer. We raked leaves together in the fall. We were the kind of family that looked complete from the sidewalk. But inside that house, there was a system. And the system had a favorite. His name was Brandon. Brandon was 2 years younger than me and had figured out very early in his life that charm was a currency, and he was rich in it. He could walk into any room and make every adult in it feel like he was their favorite person within 10 minutes. Teachers loved him, neighbors loved him. My father's friends from the plant would see Brandon at block parties and say, "That boy is going to be something special one day." And maybe he was. But what he also was a liar. A careful, patient, deliberate liar who had learned that if you tell the right story to the right people at the right moment, you never have to be accountable for anything. I was 2 years older, and I had not figured out what Brandon had figured out. I was not as smooth. I was not as quick with a smile. I was the kind of kid who said what he meant and expected people to deal with it, which in a household that rewarded performance over truth made me the difficult one, the one who was always too much, the one who needed to learn to be more like your brother. I heard that sentence more times growing up than I can count. Be more like your brother. I spent 17 years trying to understand what that meant. And then I spent the next 20 learning that the best thing I ever did was stop trying. The night it happened was a Wednesday in February. I was 17, Brandon was 15. My father had come home from a double shift at the plant, tired and short-tempered, the way men get when their bodies are working harder than they want to admit. My mother had made dinner. We sat down at the table. Everything was normal. And then my father reached into the drawer where the family kept the household cash, money set aside for groceries, utilities, small things, and he counted what was there. He counted it twice. Then he put it on the table, and he said, $300 is missing. The table went quiet. My father looked at Brandon first, and Brandon, without missing a single beat, looked directly at me. Not with panic, not with guilt, with a calm, practiced steadiness that I now understand took years of rehearsal to develop. He said, "I saw Marcus going in that drawer on Saturday." Just like that, 4 seconds. 4 seconds to dismantle my entire life. My father's eyes moved to me, and I said, "That is a lie. I never touched that money." And my father looked at me, this man who had known me for 17 years, who had held my hand crossing streets, who had taught me to ride a bike in this very driveway, and he made a decision. He chose Brandon's 4 seconds over my 17 years. He stood up from that table, walked to my room, opened my door, and said, "Get your things and get out of my house." My mother sat at that table and did not say a single word. I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time, waiting for something, anything, a hand raised, a voice, just her saying, "Calvin, wait," and she looked down at her plate. That silence, that specific silence from my mother, that hurt more than anything my father said. I went to my room. I pulled a duffel bag from the closet and I packed what I could reach in the 20 minutes I gave myself before I refused to see him scramble. Clothes, my school ID, my journal, a photograph of my grandmother who had died the year before and who had been the only person in that family who ever looked at me like I was exactly enough. I walked out of my room. Brandon was in the hallway, and he looked at me, this 15-year-old boy who had just burned my life to the ground with 4 words, and he said nothing. He just stepped to the side to let me pass. I walked to the front door. My father was standing in the living room with his back to me. My mother had not moved from the table. I opened the door. The cold hit me like a wall. February in Indianapolis does not negotiate with you. It gets into your coat and your boots and the spaces between your fingers, and it stays there. I walked down the porch steps. I heard the door close behind me. I stood on that sidewalk in front of the brick house on Talbot and 34th Street, and I looked up at the sky, and I made a decision. I was not going to fall apart on this sidewalk. I was going to save that for later. Right now, I was going to walk. So I walked. I ended up at the door of my friend Darnell's house 3 blocks away. Darnell's grandmother, Miss Ruth, answered in her housecoat at 9 o'clock at night and looked at me standing there in the cold with a duffel bag and snow on my shoulders, and she said, "Boy, get in here before you freeze." She never asked for an explanation. She made me a plate of food from whatever was left from dinner, set up the fold-out couch in the basement, and told me the bathroom was down the hall and breakfast was at 7:30 if I wanted it. That was Miss Ruth. I stayed on that fold-out couch for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of waking up early enough to take the bus across town so nobody at school would know I wasn't living at home anymore. 6 weeks of doing homework at a fold-out table next to a washing machine. 6 weeks of eating whatever Miss Ruth made without complaint and doing the dishes every single night because it was the only way I knew how to say thank you to someone who owed me absolutely nothing. I did not call my parents. They did not call me. And at 17, when your parents do not call, you learn something about where you actually stood. By the time I graduated high school 4 months later, I had already figured out the next step. I had found a work-study program through my school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who pulled me aside one afternoon, looked at me over her glasses, and said, "Something changed with you this semester. You want to tell me what's going on?" I told her. She sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, let's figure out what's next." That woman changed my life in the span of 3 conversations. She helped me apply for a state assistance program that covered my first semester of tuition at IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. She connected me with a housing coordinator who found me a spot in a shared transitional apartment program for young adults aged 18 to 21. She wrote me a reference letter so thorough and so detailed that the housing program coordinator called her personally to say it was one of the best she had ever received. I moved into that apartment the week after graduation. 2 roommates I didn't know, a twin mattress on a metal frame, a shared kitchen with mismatched plates. It was the first place I had ever lived that felt like freedom. I want to tell you about the years between that apartment and the office building, because I need you to understand that what I built was not luck, and it was not fast, and there was no moment where it suddenly got easy. I worked while I went to school. Warehouse shifts on weekends, night security twice a week, a food delivery job my junior year that I took because the hours were flexible and the tips were unpredictable, but it was money that was mine. I graduated with a degree in business management in 5 years instead of 4 because I had to drop to part-time 2 semesters when the money got too tight. I took that degree and I got a junior operations role at a distribution company in Indianapolis, and I worked that job like it was the only thing between me and going back to nothing, because it was. I got promoted twice in 3 years. I moved to Chicago because a recruiter reached out with an opportunity, and I took it the same week he called because I had learned early that hesitation is a luxury you cannot afford when you are building from zero. I climbed. Not because I was the smartest person in any room, because I was the most prepared, always, without exception. I knew that the one thing nobody could take from me, the one thing Brandon's 4 seconds and my father's decision and my mother's silence could not touch, was the work I was willing to do when nobody was watching. So I worked, year after year, quietly, completely, without waiting for applause. By 37, I was the regional director of operations at a logistics consulting firm called Meridian Group in downtown Chicago. Corner office, 16th floor. A team I had built personally, people I had recruited and trained and fought budget battles for because they were worth it. A salary that would have seemed like science fiction to the boy on the fold-out couch. I had not spoken to my parents in 20 years. I had tried, once. I was 22. I called my mother on a Sunday because Sunday was the day her guard came down, the choir singing day, the soft day. She answered. I said her name. She went quiet in a way that told me she knew exactly who it was. Then she said, "Marcus, your father." And I said, "I'm not calling for Dad, I'm calling for you." And she said, "I can't do this right now." And she hung up. I never called again. I sent one letter at 25, 3 pages, no anger in it. I had burned through the anger long before then. Just questions. Just the honest human need to understand how a mother sits at a table and watches her son walk out into the February cold. No response. After that, I accepted it. Not happily, but finally. And I kept building. The Tuesday it happened, I was reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant Janelle knocked twice and opened my door. Janelle had been with me for 4 years and had a very specific way of knocking when something was outside the normal shape of a workday. This was that knock. She said, "There are 2 people at the front desk downstairs. No appointment. They say they're your name." She paused. "They say they're your parents." I put my pen down, very carefully. The room did not spin. My pulse did not race. It was quieter and stranger than that, like a sound you stopped expecting to hear so long ago that when you finally hear it, your body doesn't know what category to put it in. I asked Janelle to describe them. She did. I knew before she finished. I sat there for a moment that felt longer than it was. 20 years. Brandon's 4 seconds. The February cold. Miss Ruth's fold-out couch. Mrs. Patterson and her reference letter. The twin mattress, the warehouse shifts, the 5-year degree, Chicago. All of it lived in the space of that moment, the whole distance between who I was when that door closed and who I was sitting in this chair right now. I looked at Janelle. I said, "Tell them I'll be down in 10 minutes. Put them in the 2nd floor meeting room." She nodded and closed the door. I stood up. I walked to the window and I looked out at the Chicago skyline for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I straightened my jacket and I went down. They looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into that meeting room. My father, Calvin, was 70 now, white-haired. A heaviness in the way he held his shoulders that looked like something more than age, like weight he had been carrying for a long time. My mother, Diane, was 67. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck, hands folded on the table in front of her like she was sitting in church. They both looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, none of us said anything. Because, what do you say? What is the first sentence after 20 years and a February porch and a letter with no response? My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said, "You look good, son." Son. I sat down across from them. I did not smile. I did not perform anything. I just said, "Tell me why you're here." And then my father told me about Brandon. Brandon had been running a home renovation business for the last 7 years. He had gone to my parents, the same parents who had thrown me out over $300 and had told them the business was growing, had shown them projections, had used every ounce of that charm he had been perfecting since he was 15 years old. They had given them their retirement savings. Over the course of 5 years, $240,000. Every time he needed more, they gave it. Because it was Brandon, because it was their son, because they had spent his entire life making sure that Brandon never had to face a consequence alone. The business had failed 8 months ago. Not from bad luck, from Brandon using the money for himself, a lifestyle, a car, trips, things with no connection to the business they thought they were funding. Everything was gone. Their mortgage was behind. My father had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and the medication costs were cutting into what little income remained. They had called in every favor they had. They had borrowed from every person willing to lend. And then they had looked up my name, found Meridian Group, found my office address, and driven 4 hours from Indianapolis to sit across from the sun they had put out in the snow. My mother looked at me and said, "I know we have no right to ask you for anything. I know that, Marcus. I have known that for a long time." Her voice broke on the last sentence. "But you were always the strong one. Even when things were hard, you were always the one who figured it out, and I don't know who else to call." I looked at my mother, this woman who had sat at that dinner table and looked at her plate, this woman who had answered the phone on a Sunday and said, "I can't do this right now." This woman who had received 3 pages of honest, handwritten words from her firstborn son and had never written back a single line. I looked at her, and I felt something complicated and true move through me all at once. Not triumph, not revenge. Something that felt like 20 years of grief arriving at a table and finally being allowed to sit down. I did not answer them that day. I told them I needed time. I arranged a car to their hotel. I was not going to let them drive back to Indianapolis that night. Not at their age, not in that state. I walked back upstairs to my office and I sat at my desk and I called the only person I needed to talk to. Miss Ruth had passed away 7 years ago, but Darnell, her grandson, my oldest friend, was still in Indianapolis, still the person who picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. He listened the way he always had, without interruption, without rushing toward a conclusion. When I finished, he said, "What are you feeling right now, for real?" I said, "I'm feeling like Brandon took the money and they drove 4 hours to ask me to clean it up. Same thing they did my whole life, just bigger numbers." Darnell said, "So what are you going to do?" And I said, "Something they never did for me." He waited. "I'm going to tell them the truth." I met them for breakfast the next morning, a diner near their hotel, corner booth. I got there first and I ordered coffee and I sat with everything I needed to say until it was settled inside me. Not sharp, not performed, just honest. When they sat down, I looked at both of them and I talked. I told them about the February night, the duffel bag, the 20 minutes I gave myself to pack because I refused to let my father see me scramble. I told them about walking 3 blocks in the snow to Darnell's house, about Miss Ruth's fold-out couch and the mismatched plates and the twin mattress, about the Sunday phone call and the 3-page letter. My mother was crying before I was halfway through. My father sat with his hands flat on the table, very still, the way a man sits when he is absorbing something he cannot argue with. I told them I was not going to give them money, not because I didn't have it, because it would solve the wrong thing. Brandon had done this. Brandon, the one they had spent their entire lives protecting from his own consequences, had taken their retirement and spent it on himself. And if I handed them a check right now, Brandon would never have to stand in front of what he did. He would just be rescued again, and they would never have to look at the pattern that had made that rescue feel normal. I slid a piece of paper across the table. A financial counselor I had already called that morning, a nonprofit housing assistance coordinator in Indianapolis who specialized in exactly their situation, an attorney who did free consultations for seniors facing mortgage issues. 3 doors I had already knocked on for them before breakfast. My father looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time. And then Calvin Reed, the man who had stood up from that dinner table and opened my bedroom door and said, "Get your things," without a single moment of investigation, looked up at me with something in his eyes that I had never once seen directed at me in 17 years of living under his roof. Shame. Real, unperformed, too late shame. He said, "I believed him over you that night. I didn't ask a single question. I believed him." I waited. I have thought about that night more times than I can tell you, and I never let myself pick up the phone because I didn't know how to say it, but I need to say it now. He looked straight at me. I was wrong, Marcus. What I did to you was wrong, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. The diner kept moving around us, plates clinking, someone laughing at another table, a child somewhere near the window asking for more syrup. And I sat across from my father in all of that noise, and I let his words land. I let them actually land, not deflect them, not minimize them, not rush past them to get to what came next. I let my father's apology exist in the space between us. And then I said, I hear you, Dad. Not, it's okay, because it wasn't okay, and it never would be completely okay, and pretending otherwise would have been a lie. Not, I forgive you, because forgiveness is not a light switch. It is a long, slow process you do for yourself more than anyone else, and I was not going to perform it across a diner table just to make an old man feel better in the moment. Just, I hear you, which was true, which was the most I had to give right then, and which, I could see from my father's face, was more than he had expected. That was 2 years ago. Brandon, from what I understand, is still Brandon. My parents finally had the conversation with him that was 20 years overdue, and it went exactly the way conversations like that go when the person on the other end has never once been held accountable for anything. Denial, deflection, eventually a partial acknowledgement that satisfied nobody. He has not paid back $1. That is Brandon's conscience to carry, not mine. My parents did not lose the house. The counselor I connected them with found assistance programs that stabilized their mortgage. My father's diabetes is being managed. They are not comfortable, but they are not on the street. My mother calls me now, every Sunday. The calls are careful, imperfect, full of the specific awkwardness of two people rebuilding something from rubble without a blueprint. Some weeks we talk for 40 minutes, some weeks it's 10. Some weeks one of us says something, and there is a silence where 20 years sits in it like a third person on the line. But we stay on. We don't hang up. And I have decided that staying on, imperfectly, carefully, without pretending the rubble isn't there, is enough for now. My father and I are slower. He called me on my birthday this year. First time in 20 years. He didn't say much, just, "Happy birthday, son. I'm proud of you." And then a pause where I think he wanted to say more and didn't know how. I said, "Thank you for calling, Dad." And I meant it. I want to say something before this story ends. To the person watching this right now who has been let down by the people who were supposed to be your foundation, the person who was blamed for something they didn't do, the person who was thrown away to protect someone else's comfort, the person who built everything they have without a single person in their corner who was supposed to be there. I see you. And I need you to hear this. Marcus did not win because his parents showed up in that lobby. He won on Miss Ruth's fold-out couch. He won filling out forms at a table next to a washing machine. He won on the bus across town so nobody at school would know he wasn't going home. He won every single day he chose to keep going in the direction of the life he deserved before anyone who hurt him had acknowledged a single thing. The apology is not the victory. The apology is just the moment when the people who underestimated you finally catch up to something you already knew. You were never what they said you were. You were never what they treated you as. And you do not have to wait for them to figure that out before you start living like it. Start now. Right where you are, with whatever you have. That is enough to begin. If this story hit something real inside you tonight, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your state, your country. It matters to us here at Tessa Stories more than we can say, because every location you drop is proof that this community is real and that none of us are sitting in this alone. We read every single comment. Every one. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it right now, because the next story coming to this channel starts in a place you will not expect and ends in a way you will not see coming. You do not want to miss it. We'll see you there.